Welcome to the complete guide to Google Analytics 4. This video will summarize Chapter 10, which is Managing User Privacy in GA4. It was written by Search Discovery's Corey Underwood, who is an analytics engineer at Search Discovery. And Corey has actually specialized in data privacy for the past 6 years. So Corey, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining. I think where we have to begin is talking about the EU. So can't talk about GA4 without discussing privacy in Europe. So I'd love to just jump in with a brief description of this transatlantic data privacy framework. What is it? What should people know about it? And why do we need it?
Sure. So Europe is governed by the General Data Protection Regulation, and that has specific rules for what's known as international data transfers. And so what Google Analytics does as part of its processing is send data to the United States. It used to be that we had an agreement known as the Privacy Shield in place that made that data transfer fairly straightforward and easy from a compliance point of view. That's not presently the case. And so the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework is a effort to get back to having an agreement between the two countries, the United States and the bloc of the European Union, that would allow that data transfer to continue without excessive compliance issues.
Got it. So there's a lot of concerns, a lot of questions with clients about are there challenges with Google Analytics in the EU specifically. And it sounds like the summary is, we're sort of in this middle ground, waiting on this transatlantic data privacy framework. And the latest was an agreement. What was it? What do they call it? An agreement in principle, something
An
like
agreement
that.
in principle, yes.
Okay.
So they had initial discussions. They said they think they can kind of work something out, and those discussions have been ongoing the majority of this year. We're not expecting to get final say until the end of the year or possibly early 23.
Okay. Well, regardless, Google Analytics 4 was still rolled out with a pretty wide range of new features that were not available in the prior version of Google Analytics to do two things. One, I would say there's a category of features that help a marketer control with some more precision than we had in the past what they're doing with their data. They can do things like delete data. They can make sure they're not capturing it in certain use cases. Then there are other things that are focused on knowing that we are living in a world where browsers are putting restrictions on storage, such as cookies. How can we make smart guesses about how many people are visiting a website? I guess sort of what's the smartest way to deal with the new sort of technical limitations. So there's a ton of stuff that we could talk about in this category. What I'd love to do is just get some of the highlights from you. You've written a whole chapter, which is very thorough on these different features. And so someone can, if they want to go into the weeds, can do that. But what would you say are the most important things that have launched in the last couple of years with GA4?
So Google has been paying attention to the shift toward basically having sort of compliance needs in GA4. And so they understand that not every user will consent to having their analytics data captured. So they've developed a couple of different technologies. One of the major features of GA4 is conversion modeling. And so it estimates based off the data that it observes, the data that it can't observe, what that might look like from a conversion contribution point of view. And it does this through different technologies, such as the consent mode that's in use for Google tags, as well as Google Signals is used for cross-device kind of identification.
Mm-hmm.
So the calculations to what goes into make a visitor or a user are substantially different in GA4, and it hopes to get toward a more true representation of what the modern user is, as in someone who has multiple devices potentially and may have to deal with different kinds of regulatory frameworks.
Right. Right, because if I'm using an alternate analytics platform that doesn't have conversion modeling, I have to accept that there's some amount of like a black hole in my data a little bit. Or there are instances where I have data that I can't, in the case of conversion modeling, I can't see your history. So I can tell someone converted, but I can't tell, like, did they come through a paid click ad? And Google tries, before you even pull a report, to help stitch some of that back together on your behalf. Ideally, to give you a more realistic understanding of what's going on, although what we're calling realistic is a modified version of the data, not looking at the raw data itself. That's kind of how I think about it.
Right. So GA4 has two concepts of reporting identity. One of them include assuming that you meet the thresholds that modeled conversion data.
Hmm.
And so that's available in the GA4 reports, but if you send that downstream into any other system, that has modeled data in it as well. The other reporting identity is known as observed. And observed is directly what it sees without any of the modeling, which may or may not be true depending on the demographics and their browser mixes and what regulation that you're subject to.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So you're more likely to be confident in observed data if all of your users live in Kansas and use Chrome than you would be if you're European and using Safari, I would say.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, what about other features? Are there any other things that you would call out as important related to privacy, specifically with GA4?
Yes. So for Google Signals and like device location and device information, they've actually enabled those features to be turned off on a country by country basis. Now, there's a configuration, so it's not just globally enabled for everything.
Hmm.
You can also turn off ads personalization on a country by country basis. So, like all of those more sensitive compliance features have the ability to be disabled for specific regions where that local regulation may require it.
Hmm.
One of the other things that it does is Google no longer keeps the IP address. So even though that wasn't visible to you in Universal Analytics, they used it. Now they drop that after the initial processing and geolocation lookup.
Hmm.
Additionally, for Europe, that primary processing can now occur within the EU prior to the more aggregated data going into the United States, as opposed to the previous version where all of the data at the hit level was sent to the United States and processed entirely here.
Got it. Yeah. So a little pre-processing. Well, the last area that I want to call out, I don't know if we have want to go too deep into this, but your article does a good job about describing privacy policies and what should be in them, as well as other sort of privacy acknowledgments that a website owner should be considering. So just, what's the quick, I would say if somebody wants to see detail on that, they should definitely check out the article. But what's the quick summary of privacy and policies, and anything new there that people should be considering you'd like to call out as well?
There's a couple of different things that I'd like to mention. So there are a number of different agreements within Google Analytics that you are attesting that you have the ability to do the data collection and that you have the consent of the user in certain scenarios and you're properly disclosing all of that information. And those are required for like a terms of service agreement, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're saying by using GA, you are going to do these things, and these are attesting that you're doing those things.
Yeah.
So that is something that every company needs to look at to see if those specific scenarios apply to you based off the features that you have enabled for the platform.
Mm.
Uh, Additionally, regulation may require that you have a privacy policy. And even if regulation doesn't, Google does for as part of their terms of service. And in that terms of service, you're required to have specific clauses related to just the general collection of data for Google Analytics. But then there's some specific clauses that you would probably have to look at adding if you had, say, advertising features enabled.
Right. Okay. Well, that is very helpful. And again, if someone wants to learn more, I think chapter 10 is the place to go. Again, the chapter is called Managing User Privacy in GA4. And Corey, thank you so much. I really appreciate your work on this.